In this video, Avocademy mentor Bianca is going to walk you through everything you need to know to get started with Figma. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe, and if you want to schedule a call with an Avocademy mentor, there's a link in the description for that. Let's get into it.
Alrighty, so today we are going to be going through Figma and pretty much doing a walkthrough of what you can find when you're in Figma. So pretty much quick introductions into the interface and what's displayed to you while you're in there, what you can interact with, all the different tools that Figma has to offer. We're probably not going to touch on all of them because there is a lot, but we'll try to get those basic ones down. That way, as you're practicing and get an idea of how to use Figma, you know where things are. We're going to also speak about the organization of it and how you can go about being organized right from the start when you're working in Figma. And then we'll do a button sign up screen, demonstration, kind of using the new things that we're learning. That way we can get a visual of how to go about using those tools. So let's get into it. Alrighty, so if you just signed up or logged into Figma and you are exploring around, I wanted to show you what it would look like, what you would see when you're in there. So this is pretty much the dashboard file space of Figma. These are pretty consistent of what you will see at the top. It's how you would start a new file, so a new Figma file or a new FigJam file. We also are currently on the recents area, and so that will show the recent files that you've interacted with or maybe edited in. You also have a draft space. This will probably be a space that you use a lot right now as you're exploring Figma. It does have the ability to hold a lot of different design files. It's kind of like a personal draft space. So with that said, it is kind of unorganized in there. So my main tip for this would be to be sure to get in the habit of titling your design files, because say if all three of these went as untitled, then I'll probably start forgetting like what is what, and I would have to go and click into each of them and to see my work. So you just want to get in the habit of titling them. That way you know what is what, and then you don't have to do that extra step. You also have a teams area, which comes in handy when you're working alongside others. With the free plan, you are given an option to have teams. But you are only able to have one project. So right now you can see 1 and 1 is being used. This is one right here, and it's titled Team Project, so that's considered one project. And then within there, I can have 3 Figma files and 3 FigJam files. Other things to mention in here are right now I am on the web version of Figma, but just to give you a heads up, there is a desktop app. So if you want to download the app to have it on your computer, you could just go ahead and click right there and it would start downloading, and then you will have the option to have Figma available to you on your computer. And then additionally, the other thing I wanted to mention is being able to explore community. You have that option here as well. By clicking explore community, you will be able to see the community area, and within here are a lot of different just free resources to use. So a lot of different things here to explore, and you can search for specifically what you're looking for. Alrighty, so with all that said, we're going to hop into a design file. That way I can show you what you're going to see when you're in there. So let's do that. Okay, so this is what the design file looks like, and pretty much where you're going to be working out of as you begin your designs. So let's talk about the spaces that we see. The first space that I want to talk about is the top gray bar here. This is our toolbar, and where we'll be able to access many different tools like frames, shapes, pins, text, plugins, and then being able to comment. So we'll go ahead and touch on that a little bit more. On our left hand side over here, we have our left sidebar, and I consider this like the navigation organization side of things, where you'll be able to see how things are laid out on your canvas, and as well as just an area where you can pull from to bring things onto the canvas. So a very good space for organization and being able to see what you're doing on the canvas at a different glance. Your right sidebar is kind of like a control panel. So when you do bring something onto the canvas, you're going to be able to start seeing different settings, different properties that come up for that item that you placed onto your canvas. So it's going to be a really good space as far as customizing and making changes to your design. So this one's constantly going to be changing with whatever you're selecting and working on. So you'll get a hang of that as we're looking through it. And then of course the main space within the middle being your canvas space. and where all your different designs are going to go. All right, so now that we got an idea of what we see when we start Figma up and what we see when we enter a design file, let's go ahead and jump into the tools. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is what we are currently on, which is our move tool. This is pretty much acts as your selector tool, how to move things around on the canvas. So I'm using my trackpad to be able to move around on my canvas. Let me actually put something down real quick so we have something to look at. On my trackpad, I'm able to just move left and right, up and down, and pinch my fingers to zoom in and out. If you are on mouse and keyboard, the way you can go about doing that is holding down shift, and then when you scroll with your mouse, you're able to go left and right. And then if you hold down control and scroll with your mouse, you're going to be zooming in and out. So I just wanted to give you that idea. That way you understand how we're kind of moving around the canvas. Another way to go about it is to use your hand tool. So we have the hand tool here, which brings out the hand, and we are able to move around the canvas to look at different things. So you can use this hand tool or press H. A lot of people like to actually, instead of doing that, you can hold down spacebar. This gives you the idea of panning, and then you can move back and forth like so. Sorry for my key instructions there. I have it to where you can see what keys I'm pressing. That way, if I start typing things or pressing things, you're able to see it if I happen to do any shortcuts. So now that we have an idea of how to move around the canvas, move, like I said, is kind of like your selector and being able to move things around. So if when I select something, as you can see, it gets this blue outline around it that lets me know that it's selected. And then I'm able to move things around while I am on the move tool. Also, these different tools that have little drop downs that lets you know that there's more within there. So right now, as you can see, the move tool also has scale. We're not going to really touch on scale too much, but just wanted to let you know that these little drop downs do mean that there's more information or more tools within there. So frames are pretty much going to act as your containers. They're going to hold your designs, hold your information. So right now when I click frame, there's 3 ways you can go about putting a frame on your board. We could just click and drop that frame onto the canvas. That's going to add a default frame of 100 pixels by 100 pixels. We could also click and hold. And by doing that, we can determine our frame size before we put it down. So say if we wanted this to be the frame size, when we let go and release that click, that frame is going to drop the way I had it as I was moving around. So that's another way to go about putting a frame on the board. And then also you always want to check out that control panel. Like while we are on frame, we see that there's some options specific to frame. And what you see over here are some presets that are the frame size of the device that you may be wanting to use. So say if we're building for an iPhone 14 Pro, then if I click that, it will give me that frame size by default. So you can also make changes to their dimensions. Again, always check out this control panel to see what options are available. When our frame is down, we have some options that we can play around here with, but let's talk about these dimensions, the width and height. So if I wanted to change the dimensions of this one, I can go ahead and type that. If it's 300 by 600, then I have now made that change and it will reflect onto the frame. So that is the frames. We also have a shapes area. These are all the different shape tools that Figma offers. We can do the same thing as we did with frames. We can either click to place it down, or we can hold down our click and then bring out a shape that we want. Some other options that I should mention here are your corner radius and then your rotation. Rotating will rotate the rectangle based off of how you want it. So if we want to add a 90-degree angle, we can go ahead and type that 90-degree angle, and then now it has made that switch. We could also change the corner radius, which will focus on the corners of the shape. If we put this at 20, you would see that now it has a curve to it. So that's going to come in handy as well as you are working on your designs. You can also pull these inner circles to change the corner radius as well, and you will see that that number is reflecting over there on the right side panel as I move this back and forth. So that's 2 ways to go about that. We also have pen and pencil. Again, not going to touch too much on this, but pen and pencil come in handy if you're, making different kind of shapes, maybe doing some icons. So more of a creative space if you want to go that way with your pen and pencil. We have a text area, and what that allows you to do is to drop text onto your canvas. So by having that click and then clicking on the canvas, I can add text. And so with that, as you can see, I have added text onto my canvas space. We also have a resource area. This is where when you make components, you'll be able to find components. Components will come in handy as far as being organized within your file and saving yourself time in constantly recreating something, especially if it's something that you're going to be reusing. So many different reused items that you make, you can turn them into components, and then that way you can reuse those elements throughout your design and grab them a lot easier. And by doing that, this is actually one of the spaces where you'll be able to find those components and reuse them. And then we have a plugins area. This is where you can add plugins from the community space and put them into your Figma. That way you can use them. One of my favorites to use is Unsplashed. So if you click on the plugin, you'll get some details about the plugin itself. Sometimes there's instructions on how to go about getting that plugin to work. But if you press run, now we have that plugin available. And then so Unsplash being where you can grab stock photos. So if I wanted to add an image here, I can go ahead and select something and then bring my image, and it'll go within that. Same with widgets in a way. These are created by the community, and they're just more so features that you can add into your document as you are working through it. So if you wanted, say, something for notes, you can search and add those sticky notes in. And then so now here are some notes that I can use as a feature within my document. We already touched on the hand tool. So next is the comments area. As you can see, the side panel here changed in regards to what we're working on. So just wanted to keep that in mind as you're in comments. Now we have like a little side panel related to comments. But yeah, the comments is good for if you are leaving feedback, asking questions, leaving notes. And so you can do that here, and you can also at people. That way when they enter the document, they know that this is for them. They know that that comment is for them, and then you can move that comment around and place it where it needs to be. And so that is our comment section. Last few things I want to touch on up here is where you can locate this document. So this document is within drafts currently, and it's untitled. You can double click to title it. So if we wanted to title it, we could do that. And then we have a little drop down here of different information. Like if you wanted to see the version history of the documents and see all the different changes that have been happening, you would go there. You know, option to export. You could also decide if you want to move this project. So if I don't want it to be in drafts, I can move it into the teams area, and then it would be moved. And then so now it is in the teams area. Alrighty, so let's talk about this left sidebar area. Like I said, this area is going to be really good when it comes to the organization of things. So I'm really going to be focusing on that piece in talking about this area. So with us working in that toolbar space, we've brought things onto the canvas, and the left sidebar is going to reflect that. These are called our layers. So one of the things I wanted to talk about here is how layers are lined up. It's based off of what I've put onto the canvas recently. So most recently, when we were over here talking about resources, I put the sticky note down. So this is going to be the first thing on my layers. But right before I did that, I was talking about text. And so that's why now text falls underneath the sticky notes, because this is the most recent. This was the second most recent. Before that was the big rectangle when we're talking about the radius. And then before that, the first thing I had put on the canvas was this 100 by 100 default frame size that I put an image on. So the newest is what's first. Why I bring that up is because this is when things that are in front of each other or behind each other come into play. So this sticky note, since it's first, that means it's in front of all these other layers right now. So I can drag this. If I drag this on top of this rectangle, it's before it. If I drag this over here before the second rectangle and the text, it's before it, because it's before it in this layers area. If I wanted it to be behind this rectangle and behind the text, then I would have to click it and drag it and then put it behind the text and the rectangle. So now it's technically behind both the text and the rectangle. If I wanted it to just be in front of the rectangle, but the text still be at the front, then I can move it right here. And then so now we see the text is still up front, but then it's the sticky note and then it's the rectangle. So there's an order to these things on this side. And I wanted to showcase that way. That way you can see how the order of your layers matter as well as you're designing. Let's talk about grouping and framing our selections. So we have this image here. With this image, let's say we wanted to put the text and the image together. Actually, when I brought the image in, I put the image on the text. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So if that happens, you probably would see it over here. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And I'm also going to make this text a little bit bigger so we are able to see it. If we wanted to group the rectangle and that text together, the way we can go about doing it is we can select both of those. You can tell they're selected by them both being blue. And we can either right click and put group selection, or you can do a Command G. And then so by doing that, we now have a group, and you can see the difference here in that change. Say if we had a whole bunch of layers, we wouldn't want like the image of the car to be up here and then the text be all the way down here. If they're grouped together, they're easier to find. And then if we wanted to ungroup it, we can Command delete, or we can just right click and click ungroup. And then now we can tell that they're no longer grouped together. They're pretty much separate in themselves. So if I move one thing, it's not going to move both of them. But when they were to group together, if I moved one thing, it did move both of them together. Same goes for frame selection. If we highlight both the text and the rectangle and we do right click and do a frame selection, now we have added a frame around those items. And so now within the frame is the text and then the rectangle. So that's how frame selection works as well. As you get more and more layers, it becomes in handy to have certain things grouped. That way you know this title, this image, they're together. So that is what layers looks like. We also have pages. Pages is another means of organizing. Right now we are on page 1. You get 3 with the teams area because we're in a team project. You get 3 free if you are using the starter plan with Figma. In your drafts, it's not limited to 3 pages, so just wanted to let that be known. So yeah, each page has like their own individual canvas that you can work in within. So if you were doing wireframes, you could have this one be titled wireframes. If you wanted to have an area where you can just locate your components all in one place, then you can have this one be components. That way, if you have wanted to make changes to them, they're all here instead of being, dispersed within pages. And then you can kind of hide those away right here. So we'll go ahead and do that for now. Assets is another area where you'll be able to see your components and libraries. In resources, I showed you this area, which is where you'll be able to see components, but this is another area, and you'll probably access this one a lot more. Where once you make a component, you'll be able to see it pop up here. A lot of good steps here to make sure anything that you want to reuse is more accessible to do so instead of starting from scratch. So that's pretty much how where libraries comes into play and the components will come into play. So we'll touch on that right here in a bit for our demonstration, but just wanted to show you where you can find those components. All right, so now we're going to move on to this right side panel. Like I said, this right side panel is like your control area for different properties. And based on what you click, you might get different options to play around with. So first I'm going to click on this rectangle. That way we could just see all the different settings that come up and we can play around with when it comes to a rectangle. Right now we have our alignment that's not working, and that's because it has nothing to really align with. But let's say if we put a frame down. So we're going to select this rectangle and drag it into the frame. By dragging and placing it within the frame, that's how we now have the rectangle go within the frame. So this layer side will reflect that the rectangle was by itself originally, but now it's within the frame. And as you can see, that unlocked the alignment area because now it's going to align within the frame. So if we want it to be aligned center horizontally, it'll make sure it does that. Maybe we want it to the left, then now it can align to the left of the frame. It can align to the right of the frame, or, center horizontal and vertical. And then so now it's perfectly centered within that frame. One thing you can do is hold down Option, and then when you hover over the item that you want to look at the measurements of, you can see that it's measuring the 251. on the top and bottom. And then the 242, 243, I can't get it perfectly, but it's nearest the center as it can be. That's just because of my frame size. If I've changed my frame by 1 pixel, let's say if I made it the 117 instead of 116, and then now I made sure it was centered again, we can check by holding Option, and as you see now it is even on all sides. So holding down Option gives you a way to just look at measurements of how far things are to each other or where it stands. Let's go back to looking at the rectangle. So we have the different dimensions here. We talked about those things. We have different layers to play around with, so that's there. One of the things I can mention as far as pass-through goes and opacity, your numbers on your keyboard play a role here. So say if I want the 100 pass-through to be 90, I can go ahead and press 9, and then the opacity will set to 90 and it will reflect there. If I pressed 4, it would be 40. If I wanted a specific number, so say I wanted 45, I would just press 4 and 5, and then it'll give me 45. And then pressing 0 gives me 100. So just wanted to point that out as far as the opacity. We have a fill space. This is pretty much where you could play around with the color. You click this color here for the color options. Many different things here. You have a little dropper if you want to go ahead and get a color from something specific. That way it can mimic that color. Another way you can go about the dropper is if you're on a Windows PC, you can press I. If you're on a Mac, you can press Control C. Make sure the item is selected that you're trying to replace the color of, and then you can go ahead and just choose the color that you want, and then it'll make that switch. Right now, my opacity from playing around with the opacity is still at 40%, so if I put it at 100, now it's going to reflect that color a little bit better. And so even if I wanted this gray, now that is the same color gray from right there where the dropper was. So just wanted to show that really quickly. But yeah, and then you have different options available down here as well. We have the stroke right here used in this case as far as like an outline around the rectangle. You can play around with the pixel sizing of that. So this is 4 pixels worth of a stroke, and then you can determine if you want the stroke to be on the center of the rectangle, on the inside of the rectangle, or on the outside of the rectangle. And then there's other options as well to check out. So that would be stroke, and then you have your effects area, which you will find like drop down, inner shadow, layer blur, and background. If you are on drop down, you can click this little sun and it'll bring up additional settings here to play around with, and that's how you can go about that. And then if I didn't want it, again, we can go ahead and minus it. If I wanted to add 2, you just continue, you can press the plus button as much as you need to. But yeah, so that is effects, and then we have a way it means to export. So yeah, and that is the right control panel. If I brought something into a frame, you will get some even more options. So that's what I mean by wanting to pay mind to the item that you're working with and what options pop up there. The new thing that happened here is constraints, so how the item chooses to stay on the frame when the frame is being resized. And so that's one of those things. If I click on the frame itself, frame now has its own properties that come up. You have the auto layout. Auto layout is a whole other video in itself, so I'm not going to touch too much on it, but just wanted to show you how it can pop up here. And then another way of getting auto layout is to right click, and you'll have an add auto layout option there if you happen to not see it and you do need it. Let me go ahead and do it. You can see that the icon over here switches from that general frame. It's not the frame no more. This is the auto layout icon. And then we'll get auto layout settings related to that frame now. So yeah, that's pretty much your right control panel. You also have prototyping here. When you start prototyping, these are where your settings will be. So when we are presenting a prototype and we haven't put it on a device, if I press play, this is what the prototype is going to look like. It's going to be a plain frame with nothing around it, no phone mock-up. But if I wanted to put a phone mock-up, then I could click on a device specifically. So this is the iPhone 14 Pro. So we're going to click that. And so now we get a idea of a mock-up. We can even choose the model, and then we can change the background color if we wanted to. And so now if I put a screen into present mode, we have that screen within a mock-up. And then this one with the image, I put that image just so we can see the difference. There you go. Now we have that screen that's within the mockup as well. And then you can play around with what is going to start your flow. So where is your prototype going to start? And the interactions that happen within your prototype. So say if somebody clicks on this car image, they will be able to go to the next screen. So now that I have just that little connection, if I were to press play, if I click anywhere else, it's not going to work. But what you can see is that it highlights blue of where I should or could click. So if I click on that car, it's going to go to that next screen, the screen that was empty. So that is pretty much very, very basic, but just wanted to show you what the settings look like as far as prototyping goes. Alrighty, so now that we've went over pretty much the layout of things, how things can be organized, the different tools that Figma has, let's go about into a very quick demonstration. It's going to be very, very small, but I want to just show you how we can use the different things we spoke about. So I'm going to put this on design so we can see the little control panel space. I'm going to delete everything that we've put on the board thus far. And then so now we're back at having a clean space. And we are going to look at our pages. I'm going to delete this third page because we don't need it right now. But let's start with our components. So we're going to work on a component, something super simple. We're going to do a button really quickly. So to start off, I'm going to go ahead and put a text down. And we're just going to write button. Now, what I like to do is I like to make this button an auto layout. Auto layout is really good at making things easier to work with once you get the hang of it. So now that we have that frame in auto layout, I'm actually going to show you all my different layers as I work through them. So instead of button, I'm going to name this one a label. So we know it's the label of the button. And then for the frame itself, we're going to title it button. We're going to put a fill on it. So as we remember, fill is the space where we're able to add color. So right now it has nothing. So we're going to add something, and then default, it's going to give it a white fill. And we'll just go ahead and stick with this like red color since it's right here. So now we have a fill of red. We have it titled button. So the cool thing about auto layout is it brings out some settings, and then you can go ahead and put padding around. So right now, default wise, we got a 10 padding. I'm gonna go ahead and move that to 16, and then I'll just make this one 16 as well. So now it's 16 all around. But if I wanted to stretch out this button, you see how it hugs to the left. That's because right here in the auto layout, that's what we're telling it to do. We want that to be centered. So we're going to go ahead and center that button. And then that way, as we pull it, it stays to the center of the button. And we're going to play around with that corner radius just to give it a little bit of a curve. To create a component, all you're going to do is you're going to either right click the item, and you can have create component here. You also have the option to do the shortcut, or you can just click up top right here where you get the create a component option. And so now we have a component. And so now we can see here's our component, and it has the little component symbol next to it. Another thing to mention is this is the main component. So if we were to create a duplicate of this, so if we Command D, it made a duplicate, we have a instance of that component, which is aka like a copy of that component. And then that one is more of an outline of the component shape. And that lets you know that it's an instance of this component, and the instance will follow what the main component does. So if I wanted to change the size, the instance would follow. And so with that said, let's go into our little wireframes page here, and we're going to put a frame down. We'll do a iPhone 14, and so we'll bring down that iPhone 14 frame, and we'll call this like our sign up page. That way we can start labeling things, because again, you want to get used to labeling things. And so instead of going to this page, pressing copy, and then going back to this page and then pasting it down, instead of doing that, we're going to go into our assets. And if you see in our assets, when you create a component that you've made in the project is going to pop up here. Same for up here. A component you've made is going to pop up here. And then so you are now able to take that button that you created and drag it on to your design. And then so now you have that button in place for your sign up. maybe this is not a start sign up page. Maybe this is like the start before you get to the sign up page. So this is like the get started button. So now we have a button here. If we wanted to bring an image into this, we could. We can right click, go into our plugins, and then we can click Unsplash. So that's another way to get to your plugins. And let's say we wanted to do something like nature or plant related or something, we can go ahead and click plant. I forgot to select. So when you forget to select the frame, you can drag the picture into there, since I forgot, but you want to make sure you select the frame that you are trying to get the image in, if that's what you are doing, if that's your goal. So I have the frame selected, and then now when I click the plant image, it'll generate an image in there. So I changed our button color really quickly just so that way it can actually match with the theme of this image. But let's say we got our button, we have our little startup, we want some text here maybe, so we can go ahead and just add text really quickly, and we'll call this like get growing. And we can change the again, if we wanted to change the style, we could. There's many different font options, but we'll go ahead and just give this a bold and make it bigger, and then we can horizontally center it, and then we can change the color of the text to like white. Now that we place that text down, remember you always want to go back into your labels area and at least start organizing things. So maybe this is the header, and then if we wanted to do like a tagline, we can just go ahead and duplicate. So I'm going to hold down Option and drag this down. We're going to actually go back into our text and change, let's say the sizing, we'll do like a medium, and then we could do, I'm going to actually do 18 for this, and then we can change the wording up, like get growing is the name, and then taking care of your plants just got easier. Now since we duplicated, they both say header, we want to come back into here and we want to label this like our tagline, and then since they're like items, going back to that idea of grouping, since they're like items that are near each other, with each other, we want to grab both of those, and you can do a group select to place them together, and we could call this like, you know, titles, and that way we know that these two items are together, and then if we're in titles, we can see both of them. Another thing you could do, we're going to ungroup, and what I like to do is go into an auto layout. So if I press auto layout, it puts it in a frame. Again, we can title this titles, and then so now within titles is that header and that tagline, and now we can play around with like the spacing between both items. Right now it's at 10, so it's 10 pixels apart. This is 40 pixels apart, so you can play around with how far apart you want those two items to be. And then we can, if we wanted it to be in the center, that's what center looks like. I'm going to leave it left align for now. And then again, you could play around with the padding of this particular frame. And then we would want to make sure it's centered. So again, as you can see, there's 28 over here, but then it's 12 over here. So if we wanted something to be centered, then we can go play around with this alignment up top and then double check it. Okay, so that's what it's looking like. If I actually wanted to help with because the white is on like a white background, so if I wanted to help with this, again, we can touch on like the different settings that are here within our control panel. So let's go ahead and add another fill, and then you can see that the default of this fill is at 20%, and then it's for black. I'm going to change this black, and I'm actually going to do a linear look. That way it can go into a gradient of like the black at the top, and then slowly start making its way to like more transparent. So I'm going to bring that darkness down a bit, and then probably make it a little bit more than that 20%. We'll say like 35. Okay, so yeah, there we go. And then actually I'm going to change this, the one that it gradually goes to lighter. I'm going to change it from the black color to white, so that you can see how the difference if I move it really fast. So I'm going to put it on the white so it's a little bit lighter, and I can show you the difference but by turning it on and off. So this is what it looked like with it on, off, on, off. We're going to put down another frame of the same device, which that was the iPhone 14. We're going to label this one as the sign up. So for the sign up page, I'm going to be using a community resource just for time's sake, because I'm sure this video is already very long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to browse the community. Alrighty, so I'm going to choose this one right here. And then I'm going to browse it. As we can see, they're going to have typography in here, some colors, icons, grids, some shadows to use. What I'm going to be using is the input. So let's go ahead and open that in Figma. And now we have in our drafts, we have the design system community, and then we can see all the different pages of that design system. And I am going to scroll my way into the inputs because that's what I am going to be using. And so they have them based off of the size, which is small, medium, large, and then the state that they can be in. So this is the default state. This is what it looks like when it's hovered, when it's filled, when it's active, so on and so forth. One thing I wanted to mention is that depending on the kind of plan that you have, you may have access to publish the library. And so if you do, you're able to go ahead and press publish. And then it will give you the option to use this system, this design system, directly in the assets. Like you would find, if you published it, you would find all these different components laid out right here in the assets area. So if you're able to publish, you could do that without having to copy paste. But the free version right now doesn't let you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just Command C, copy this over, go back to our original document, and I am going to press paste. And then so now we have that label. So, okay, I made my button 16, and then I made the my label that I just added here 16. You may be wondering, like, why am I choosing 16? And I want to say this as a tip, as someone who made a career transition into UX UI. A good thing to do is to get in the habit of like searching for best practices. So as you start to learn different terminologies and different things, you can search for like the best practice of how to use those things. Like when it comes to like an input, like I didn't make this input, but if I were to be making this input, I could search best practice of mobile app input and then start learning about like different ways to use this input. So for like the margins, you could search mobile app grid layout best practices and then like see what comes up. And then you get an idea of like, oh, okay, so usually there's fixed widths and it's 16, but on some apps it's 20, 24. So when in doubt, I'd say you could look up some best practices if you ever feel like, oh, why am I doing that? You could look it up and see why people do the things that they do. Actually take this, and put it with our components page, since it's going to be something we are going to reuse. And I'm going to go ahead and make it component for our document. So now we also have the basic input, and if you look at our assets area, it's here as a basic input to be able to drag in and bring in an instance. We're going to go ahead and center it, make sure things look good, and I'm going to actually duplicate it and make a copy of it because we're going to need 2 areas. Technically, I think we need 3. So if we're going to do more than 2, a good thing here is to go ahead and begin our auto layout. We can auto layout these. That way we can have liked items that could be grouped together. So I'm going to go ahead and put an auto layout on them, and then I can just take one, Command D, and then I duplicated it. We'll label this inputs. That way within our inputs, you can see the 3 basic inputs that are in there. And we'll say that somebody can add their name here. We can hide the things that we don't need. So we can just go ahead and press the eyeball over here to hide, or you can right click and do the show and hide, or you can do the shortcut, which is Shift Command H. And then we'll change the text here by holding down Command to do a deep click, and we'll do a name, password, we'll do a name, email, and then password. Instead of bringing it over here, since we're going to do the exact same button, what you could do is just hold down Option and drag this one over, since we are going to be using this button. And then we can go ahead and change the wording there to sign up. And then I'm actually going to just go ahead and copy this over onto this screen. It is a white text, so it's a white text on white background. We're going to go into the select colors, which will change both the header and the tagline. So I'm just gonna change it to gray for now. We'll go ahead and do this gray. And so let's go make sure we look at our layers and make sure things still look nice. This is going to be our titles, but instead of this title, we're going to do our sign up. You can change the text to like get started. This happened because we are hugging the content, and so it's now that it's not as long of a tagline and it's just a small one, is trying to fit within that space. So actually I'm going to Command Z, and I'm going to go ahead and just make this a fixed width, so aka it stays within this fixed shape that's currently being shown right now in the blue selection. And then so now when I click to erase, it's going to stay fixed. And then we could just put like create an account. So yeah, that is what we currently have. It's all pretty organized. I guess the last thing I'll do is play around with the background so it's not just the white. We could do another linear, some gradient to this, and then I'm going to make the rest white. Alrighty, so there we go. We did a little sign up page and a start page, just so you can get an idea of like the layouts of how things are, and just being able to make sure you locate things, and just the importance of organization. We also went over being able to pull some components out of our assets area and dragging those on to our screen. The last thing I want to touch on is the prototype really quick. Since we do have two screens that we could kind of go ahead and make clickable, we can go ahead and give this the start, and then we can call this flow 1, or if we were just going to show like how to go about logging in and signing up, we can call this like sign up. That way we know that we're going to be signing up in this route or through this flow. And so that's that. And then if we want to get to this next screen, we can go about doing that by making sure we create that connection. So we're going to use these little nodes that pop up. So I'm going to pull that interaction to go ahead and go to this next page. And then so right now we get the interaction details that pop up. And so for this button, I'm saying that when someone taps it, they're going to navigate to the sign up page, and it's going to happen instantly. And that's about it. One of the new things we have here is the flows. So you can see right here is sign up, which is the flow that we added when we put that little blue marker. When I click anywhere else, there's nowhere to click. But if I do where the blue marker is, which is the little button of getting started, when I click that, it goes to the next screen instantly. So that's the prototype interaction that we just added. And there's our screen. I know it's simple, but I just wanted to go about showing how you can use Figma when you're designing. So yeah, thank you for staying tuned throughout this whole video. I know we touch on a lot of different things, and even then I know there may be some questions that may come up. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them down below. Figma can be multiple different videos in itself of like all these different things. Like components could have its own video, you know, auto layout could have its own video. So there's many different things that could be touched on in more detail, but just wanted to give you kind of like the basic idea of how Figma works and being able to walk through it and knowing where things are. If you found this video helpful at all, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to see more content. We thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Alrighty, bye-bye.